with solar, is that something that affordable housing units have been able to figure out a way to incorporate into?
Yeah, so HUD has what's called an energy performance contract.
Okay.
So many housing authorities have taken advantage of that over the years. They've had this opportunity available for like 20 years now.
Okay.
And many housing authorities using that as an option to get into some of the solar types of developments. And I've toured quite a few, over the years, primarily in outside of the southeast.
Power is much more expensive, but that's the challenge we have.
It wasn't until the sale Dominion Energy bought, well, I'm saying, that's when I realized it.
Oh, yeah,
When the media started running all of these.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, how are you? When the media started running all of these stories when Dominion Energy was coming, and it was interesting to see that our energy is priced so high.
Most encouraged are about, I think, 2 summers ago, did a huge article on we equal what people think
It's just,
in our area.
this is kind of weird.
It's kinda crazy.
It is kind of crazy.
But I live in probably 1,000 square foot apartment right now, and I've come out of a 3,500 square foot home. My power bill here is higher than,
At home?
yeah. Yeah. But I had Duke Power up in, up in Greenville, and I got Dominion,
It's true.
Yeah.
Disaster.
Oh, wow.
Check every year, and the 15th of every year, the 15th year, get a real big check back.
Okay. You mentioned disaster, which one?
The 100-year flood.
Oh, yeah.
She invited Samuel Jackson up because she's been doing a snake in my house video.
Is that what you're doing? Okay.
She unfortunately has had a bad run.
Thank you.
Snakes. All right, well, we're ready. We can multitask. Some progress. That was really hard breaking cancer.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm gonna put it right there. I think it's Davis. Yeah, I think. But when Mo went out for a while, I don't know. I know. Which one of you is where it's supposed to be right now? Hello, how are you?
Mentor, the next leader.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you? Just saying.
Young lady.
I can take all of that.
John Greer.
It was online. She called me last night.
And then he goes, it was when, not when this police chief. I said, he didn't call me. I said, that wasn't, so they didn't.
Well, that's what Dee was asking me about, because they only have 2 members on the whole committee. I said, why don't you have 3? Because you have to have a unanimous vote to go into executive session if you only do 2.
And see if we can find his emails.
I
don't think I would.
That was add to that because the email was supposed to go back. And we didn't so that's definitely on the phone.
Are you?
I just want what else have you heard?
Yes, he still has his dinner on Tuesday night.
That's usually what I always have a question.
Yeah.
Why is this on the calendar?
What else have you heard?
When we get these things at the council meeting, we don't have time to
I'm starting to wonder if it's by design.
I really do.
Let me get out to you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I was trying to remember what David was. I was trying to remember what the city.
Oh, Sam. He doesn't count.
Yeah.
Mr. Moe, how are you? I would have worn my purple tie if you'd have had that thing on the nose.
I just wanted to look good for you, Howard. Is this microphone on?
Probably, yeah, I see the green light.
Because you ordered them.
What does he have?
He didn't answer.
All the
But he was nervous.
The federal government.
He was nervous. He was nervous, really nervous. Anyway, I thought you might want to know that.
Took you on the spot.
The first question, this guy comes up, his name is John Greer. He goes, I got a question for Council Member Durham. I live in Pink Street, you never been in my block, and you never returned my emails, and you told me when I had a problem, you told me to go take care of it.
Is that a question or a statement? Well, the second one just by the saying.
Oh, yeah. How do you find truth?
I said, I can't get a copy of Columbia Water, how good it is. And we got a little mustard flavoring, you know, just like fine wine.
That's right. It was a hostile environment.
Earthy taste is
District 2 people, man. You need to tell Ed to control his
those
crowd.
things were planned. That fellow that used to drive the Charles,
Yeah, that's him.
terrible question.
Hey, drag all the seats out.
Business.
I wanted to give y'all, I'm sorry, but I wanted to give y'all a heads up. Late last week. With our words?
We saw that. I saw that.
I think so.
He was part. It was on the agenda. I did. It seems like this is what everybody's doing lately. Is it election day? So 10 people. But 10 people. I'll give you like 2 minutes. Say what goes here. So she ain't gonna like me when I say that, but I don't. That's what I'm saying. If you don't know us by now, you ain't got no homework. That's all I guess.
I know, right? I think her was a sophomore here. I can't believe I won.
He's my gravy.
I do my homework.
What's you here today?
You know what I tell everybody? Build something up.
How are you? Back again to see you. You doing okay? Always doing. Always doing. Hey, Mo. How are you? Good. Chat, so I didn't get to say hi.
Oh, come on, give me a hug.
I'm ready. You're just watching the court. I was just watching.
Good. No, I told them that I was going to be.
Years of hard work.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, put that
I like
He's here.
Black and white. Good morning, good morning. Good afternoon, Ms. Wilson. Ms. Hammond, if you could please read the roll. Mr. Rickman?
Here.
Mr. McDowell?
Yes.
Mr. Duvall?
Present.
Mr. Madura?
Here.
Mr. Davis? Here. Mr. Vine?
Need to get used to the new name, Miss Moore. Erica.
Councilman McDowell, if you would please open us with a word of prayer, please.
Let us pray. Oh Lord, this day has already been a wonderful day, not only in our lives, but in this city of ours. We simply ask that as we gather around this table and, of course, in this room, we pray for your continued blessings, not upon each individual, but also upon this city of ours as it continues to expand and grow, bloom and blossom. Touch us all, sensitize us all. We ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. The mayor is here, but he is on a call, so he will join us as soon as he finishes that. So we're going to go ahead with the agenda. I believe, Ms. Wilson, we need a motion to amend the agenda. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, just to add a few items.
Mr. Duvall?
Mayor Pro Tem, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda for the work session, following the work session, to include item 7, receipt of legal advice related to matters covered by attorney-client privilege pursuant to 30-4-70A2 Municipal Complex Convention Center, discussion of negotiations incident to proposed purchase of property pursuant to 30-4-70A2 Fire Station 2 and SECO, discussion of negotiations incident to proposed sale of property pursuant to 30-4-70A2 Genstar water tank site, and to add the following to the meeting agenda under other matters, item 68, commercial corridor development plan, Mrs. Wilson, city manager.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Madam,
Yes, sir. Is there discussion?
yeah, let me just ask a question, just for clarity's sake. The items that were amended, of course, is a continuation of our discussion, some of those items anyway. Okay, just
yesterday.
wanted to make sure.
Yes, sir, I was gonna, once you all finished your motion, I was gonna make the point that about the majority of those additions, because y'all had such a full and productive day yesterday at Busby Street, we didn't get to several items,
Okay,
and so
good.
we're gonna pick those up today.
Thank you.
I was willing to stay later.
I know.
A likely story.
In hindsight, I would have agreed with you.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to amend the agenda. No further discussion. If the clerk would read the roll.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. Ms. Wilson?
Yes, ma'am. We will begin our city council discussion items, council, Mayor Pro Tem and council, but going a little bit out of order to allow Mayor Benjamin to finish his call. And so he is fine with us getting started, and I did not tell David, I did tell Ms. Matthews that she was not up first. I should have told the person who is up first now to be ready. Is David? Okay, he's always ready, so I wasn't worried about that. But our housing official for the Code Enforcement Division with the Columbia Police Department, Mr. David Hatcher. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
We'll
Eric?
brief on the vacant building registration ordinance briefing, and I'll just kind of monitor where we are and which item we take up next.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Erica was kind enough to give me a heads up, so.
Okay.
I
thank
did,
you.
I did know. Well, good afternoon, members of council. Ms. Wilson, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the proposed vacant building ordinance with you today. Since our last meeting in June, I've had the opportunity to meet with several stakeholders to discuss the ordinance in more details. Specifically, I met with the Building Industry Association, several of the major commercial real estate companies, and several neighborhood leaders and citizens. The document I have passed out to all of you outlines the major concerns that were brought to my attention during these meetings, and little notes about how I've addressed those issues in this revised version of the ordinance, which I'll go into more detail here in a second. But first, I just wanted to restate the objectives of this ordinance from the code enforcement point of view. First objective is we want to identify all the vacant buildings in the city of Columbia. We want to establish a local point of contact to address issues with vacant properties. We want to create a mechanism for holding property owners accountable, and we want to discourage long-term vacancies. And overall, we want to reduce blight and crime in the city. You'll see I've listed several of the stakeholder concerns that that have come to my attention since June. I'll highlight a few of the major ones. First, there was some concern about the amount of time it takes an owner to decide what they want to do with their property. So once it becomes vacant and they don't know exactly how they're going to reuse it, that takes time. So the request was to have more time before we require it to be registered. So I changed the time from 60 days. So I gave a grace period from 60 days to 120 days. Once it becomes vacant, you have 120 days to register with the city of the vacant building ordinance. We had a lot of concerns with the vacant building plan. Some people thought it was going to be mostly just geared towards commercial buildings. Some thought it could be more cumbersome and require a lot of resources to put together, and it wasn't very business friendly. So my proposal was, and I mentioned in the ordinance, what we'll do is we'll create like a single one-page form to keep it simple. It'll just be a simple questionnaire. It'll be part of the application process, so it won't be anything. Trying to make it as less cumbersome as possible, but it's important. It's an important document, I think, so that we can know what's going to happen to the building. So our goal is to make that as minimally of an inconvenience as possible. Another thing is, obviously, people don't like the fees, so there's a lot of drawback on the fees. The complaint is it's a double tax. Also, that the fees should be different between commercial and residential. They shouldn't have the same fee across the board. So I haven't really changed the fees much, but I did break it up between residential and commercial, so there's different fee structures for each. And I've added several exemptions through all these meetings based on certain circumstances that I didn't think of before that we may encounter going forward. So the ordinance includes the exemptions. And I didn't take away the fees because I feel the fees are important, is an important way to kind of discourage the long-term vacancies, so I left the fees in there. That's obviously up to council to decide on that. There were some concerns about financial hardships, so we did provide an exemption in there for consideration. Also, the subject came up that if a person owns a vacant building and they don't really want to do anything with it, they just want it to be vacant, and it doesn't have any code violations, and they don't want to rent it out or don't want to occupy it, they don't feel they should have to be burdened by the ordinance. So I did make an exemption for the fees as far as so if the building's is being maintained, it's in good condition, it's in category 1 by definition in the ordinance, they'll be exempt from the fees, but we still want them to register.
That's both residential and commercial?
Yes, sir.
Where is that, David? I see the exemption for the estates. Where's the one you're just talking about?
For the fees, it's on
The exemption of fees.
the exemption. It's the exemption of the fees. It's on the second section of the exemptions. I'm sorry, I don't have
So it doesn't, I see on here, you talked about the estates and properties and probate, but if I own a property, it's in my name, but I don't want to rent it out, I don't want to be bothered with that, and it's vacant, but I'm keeping up the code, that's listed in here,
It is, and that's another exemption is the state, if it's a state or a probate, as long as it's being maintained to minimum code. We still want you to register it, but you'll be exempt from the fees.
What is the purpose of you registering that?
You know it's vacant.
So we know it's vacant.
And that gives us,
Probated, it can happen any minute, right?
it's what
If
now?
the probate and the state is settled, it can happen any minute, and what, you have to notify him that it's no longer vacant? I mean, is
It's
that,
gonna remain vacant in it,
Yeah, I think Mr. Fedor's asking if after it's vacant for a while, and then it's no longer vacant, then we notify you if it no longer has to be registered.
Yeah, we would just take it off our list.
Yeah, it's no longer.
Yeah. And it's similar to the rental ordinance. I mean, if you have a rental property and you're renting a property out and you decide you no longer want to rent it and you sell it to somebody and somebody moves into it, they notify us and we essentially close the case or close the permit.
my
So-
only concern, because it's not really a permit, they don't have to pay a fee, they feel like, that's what I'm worried about. All right,
but it's almost like two categories in it, David. The first category, of course, is, a house is perhaps demolished. the persons didn't want the property. You look at that scenario, in addition to coupled with the fact of what you're saying, Mo, whether or not it enters probate, what happens to it. So it's almost two different kinds of scenario with the same results.
If it was demolished, you wouldn't have to register.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's just vacant land.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to help us know where these properties are. Again, if it's being maintained, it really is not a big issue from the code enforcement perspective, but we'd like to know where they're at. Mostly because if we have this ordinance in place and we realize a house is vacant, it would be nice to know and have it part of our database so that we don't continuously send them letters saying, hey, you need to register with the ordinance. We'll know what the situation is already. We'll have it documented. We don't have to go through all that. So it'd be better for enforcement.
David, is the form, can you register online?
My long-term goal would be to register online. I think we're kind of the software that we use to do code enforcement is InterGov, and I think that there's some push to get that online. So once that goes online, we should be able to have something, I think, with that as well.
So to Mr. Bedore's point, I think that if there's no fees, yes, they still have to register, but they've simplified the form, and then if we're able to do it online, it really shouldn't, it's
My point.
kind of the process of doing business. It shouldn't be a lot.
Yeah, and our goal is not to make it, we're trying to make it as easy as possible.
I wonder if you can tie it to the closing attorney, just because. Okay.
Why, you can just charge another fee for it.
The attorney doesn't necessarily know if it's gonna be vacant. I mean,
No, but if you close the probate or you settle the case, notify them. Like somebody has to, I got you, we'll
But
see. We
still,
just have
it's up to the owner to, whether or not to keep it vacant or not. That's not really, I mean, the closing attorney wouldn't necessarily know. Yeah, no.
Lawyer came out.
Also, office, industrial, and general commercial structures that are listed or managed by a commercial real estate company are generally maintained and have a known point of contact. There's also a database that we can have access to that we can actually pull all that information. With that, we've exempted them from the registration. There is also probably one of the bigger concerns is there's fear that the city is trying to take away people's properties. That is not the intent. And there were some references to eminent domain in the ordinance. I removed all those references so that it doesn't say that, because that is not our intent. And there's concerns about the annual inspection. A lot of people don't want us to do the inspection. My theory is because they don't want us to see what violations are there. But I think that's an important aspect for us to be able to know what we're dealing with and know what conditions the properties are. Probably also good to share with the fire department so that they know if there's any unsafe situations they need to know about if they have to respond to.
So you would do that both residential and commercial?
The inspection? Yes, sir. That's the proposal.
And we have the ability to do that? I mean, we're talking, I mean, that could be a significant amount of properties.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a couple thousand.
I hope it's not, because I'd rather see them filled. But, I mean, that's something we need to think about.
Yes, sir.
How you would achieve that based on, what you already have on your agenda, and how we would keep up with that, I think is gonna be important, because the one thing you don't wanna do is get into a situation where some people feel like, well, I'm getting inspected, they're not getting inspected. Because most of those, after they've been closed for any period of time, have to come up to code, the current code, and that could get quite expensive for a lot of folks. So, I mean, there'd be a challenge there if they're not already struggling on vacancies. So I think we need to think about how we're gonna attack that.
I've had the same thought in terms of the education of the general public. If there is a building that's vacant for a period of time, and it meets the initial smell test, so there's no violations, no fees either. You indicated that there's a classification or there's a determination you make about that building, right?
Yes, sir.
Question is, how do we need to educate the public or in the immediate area that the building is vacant, but it's okay? it's vacant, but it's in compliance with the ordinance. Do we intend to do anything different or special on that?
We would probably,
That way, it alleviates, I think, some challenges we have and would probably reduce the number of calls we get.
yes, sir. And I think the way I interpret, the way I think it's going to work out is when the person registers or fills the application out to get the register the building, we'll do the inspection, we'll make the determination what category, and then we'll issue them the registration, whatever that, some form of piece of paper, I would imagine, that says, hey, you're registered, and maybe we'll go ahead and identify the category on that registration, just so they know, and we can provide the definitions with that too, I think, just to kind of document, so if anybody ever questions it, they could, they'll have a paper that says, here's my registration with the city.
The owner will.
The owner, yes, sir. So with all that in mind, I'll just go quickly over the revised ordinance that's in front of you. It's also included in the packet. So with the ordinance, we're proposing that all vacant buildings be registered annually. It assigns a category, as we just mentioned a second ago, to each of the buildings based on their overall condition, category 1, 2, or 3. Category 1 being the ones that are no violations, no issues. Provides for exemptions, multiple exemptions. It requires a local agent within 45 miles of the vacant building. That's similar, we took that right from the rental ordinance that we passed a couple years ago. It requires a vacant building plan. I've made that a little more simplified than the original version, so hopefully it'll be less burdensome for people. It requires annual inspections, establishes security measures, and establishes fees for registration. It also establishes fines and civil penalties for noncompliance, and we plan to handle the registration directly within the Code Enforcement Division and keep track of the registration, similar to how we do the rental permits. The same person will handle the registrations as well for the vacant buildings. I'll go over some of the exemptions for the registration. These are exemptions from the registration altogether. Residential structures that are already registered as rental units. And we know that sometimes when they're in between tenants, it may sit vacant for a while. So if they're already registered with us through that, they're exempt from this ordinance. Structures that have multiple units where at least one of them is occupied, it's not defined as a vacant building, so it'd be exempt. Office, industrial, or general commercial use buildings that are actively for sale or leased with a licensed real estate company or managed by a licensed property management company. Accessory structures that are not designed for occupancy, so like garages and sheds and et cetera. Buildings owned by the government or successor in interest to the government. And then buildings that serve as a primary residence of which the owner is away for an extended period of time for work, vacation, military, or medical reason. We want the building to be maintained to minimum code.
Government buildings are exempt?
Yes, sir.
Why is that?
Well, I guess for a lot of things, any state-owned buildings are not. We can't really regulate those anyways, and.
We don't have the ability to make them keep up the code that we require our citizens to do?
We have a lot of limitations with state and federal buildings.
So what about the university? Are they considered a state agency?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Yeah. I guess another way of putting it, do we have the authority to bring to their attention the condition of a building?
We do, and we often do. I guess and a lot of times we get compliance, but when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, we can't take it any further than that. An example would be
SCDOT too?
I was gonna say DOT and the railroad company is one of the big ones we deal with, like overgrown right-of-ways and stuff. We could tell them all day long, and sometimes we build the relationships with DOT and the railroad company so that we know who to contact, and generally we can get something done. But at the end of the day, if they say they don't want to do it, there's really nothing we can do.
We need to have our folks at the State House really look into that. We're in a community that's dominated by all these government agencies at the tune of $3.8 billion worth of property. I think they should have to require to keep up to the standards of what a home are. We're putting this onus on residents and businesses to have to follow a standard. They ought to have to follow the exact same standard. That's just, I mean.
It would be helpful.
It's going to be passed by them.
Well, I mean, but I bet, some of the legislators, I mean, They may not know it, but, we had the issue on Leesburg Road where we had 3 properties bought by DOT and they nothing got done forever and ever because they weren't in a hurry to do that project, but they bought and condemned property and then left them there vacant and it became, a homeless and drug haven. And there was nothing we could do about it, at the point, I think, and this is where this comes into play is if they're exempt, if all these entities are exempt and they're that big of a landholder in our community, there has to be something that we can do. I mean, they can't be allowed to be different than the residents.
It's like the women's club.
Yeah.
And the bottom line on all of that is that the folks in the immediate area paying taxes, and the government
Well, we're
entities
feeing
are not
them.
contributing to that base.
Put a big sign in front of the property, say, call your congressman, so-and-so.
We couldn't do that.
State legislators.
David, what would be the problem with including that category in section 5 versus section 4? So that at least you're sort of putting them on notice. Obviously, you can't charge fees, but to, I guess, continue that conversation that you have with the relationship building that we have with some of our state agency heads and or other government officials, at least they could be required to register, but not the fee.
I'm not opposed to that, but I guess it just goes back to once they decide not to, we really can't do anything at that point.
We got to get
We
legislation.
can put it in there.
Well, I
and
know
then
you can't, and-
If enforcement becomes an issue, then we'll deal with it, but maybe just put it in there as
Yeah,
a.
just as a little, kind of some teeth.
Put 'em on notice.
Makes them aware.
Put them on notice.
Well, we could, somebody suggested we do this with speeders, and it makes sense to me, and maybe we do it with those government properties. We take pictures and we run ads in the Columbia Star and the state paper and say, have you seen what your state government is not maintaining? Give them the old perp walk. I mean, that's
sounds
our
like a
other way to do it.
I'll let you all make that
ain't
call
gonna
on that piece.
It would certainly help us from code enforcement if we were universal, I agree.
4 billboards.
Make sure our ship is tight when we start doing that.
It's true.
Yeah.
There are sometimes I'm surprised, I'm like, oh, okay. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. So buildings that are exempt from the fees only, not the registration, buildings that are actively being marketed for sale or rent up to 1 year longer by appeal. Still, we would like it to be maintained the minimum code for the duration on the market. Buildings are actively being renovated, repairs, and we would like to see progression, obviously. Properties that are in probate are actively being transferred. Structures with a DP zoning classification, structures listed on the National Historic Register of Historic Places, and structures listed as eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Structures damaged by fire or weather event. The financial hardship I mentioned earlier. Category 1 structures that have not had any citations within the last 12 months. Buildings that are structurally deficient that have been ordered by the city to be demolished, and the owner has essentially signed an agreement with the city to do a consent demolition. So that's it on the exemptions. I'll just quickly moving along. The vacant building plan, again, I've tried to make it as simple as possible since the last version. I anticipate just being a one-pager that goes with the application. It'll just be a series of questions that they can check off and answer. Maybe a place where they can put a description and then sign off on it. That's what we're trying to keep that as simple as possible. And then the last section is just on the last page is the establishment of the fees. I did break it down by 2 different categories, fees for non-residential structures and fees for residential structures. The residential structures are classified or defined as 1- and 2-family residences. So anything with a 3-family or more, or commercial buildings are considered non-residential. So the initial registration for both is no charge. And then it's the first annual renewal is when we start charging the fee for the registration. And you can see the breakdown if you want me to go over all that, but it gradually increases over time. Each year you renew up to the 3rd year where it's just for non-residential to be $1,000. We're proposing $1,000 a year. Per year you have to renew it after it's been vacant for 3 years, and then on residential it's $500. We do have an inspection fee, and then we have enforcement penalties for failure to register and failure to maintain the vacant building plan. So that's kind of it. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Sure. Couple. Mine is financial a little bit. Number one, how many properties do you think they're gonna be registered or gonna fall into this ordinance? Between residential and commercial?
My initial research, I think it was about 3,000 properties that are considered vacant. And the way I came about that, it wasn't a definitive way. We were able to take the active water meters, or the inactive water meters, I should say, and we kind of queried those out, and we're assuming those are vacant.
Okay,
So-
makes sense. Number two, is there any way, or have you thought about maybe assigning all the fees that you're collecting for that in an escrow account to help with the facade program or anything else to generate the economic or economic development in some areas?
That'd be all your call. As far as I know, the money would just go into the general fund, and however you all determine to
There's gonna be a cost
distribute that.
associated with this program.
Costs associated with what?
This program,
All right,
For the
that's-
inspectors?
yeah,
it's
I
not
mean,
gonna-
that's
So if
why,
it's gonna be a cost, does that mean we're looking at an increase in the budget on your side? Is that what you're saying, then?
it's gonna have to for
Well,
them to be able to
They
do
absorb a
it.
lot of costs now. with the
Already,
work that
right?
They do. You know, when we've got properties that are abandoned or vacant and we get complaints, we board, we cut, David can.
So
give
some
you
of
a
that
list
is
of
already-
I'm
things.
assuming that all the money collected is gonna go into their budget to help them cover all these costs, not only from this, but from the enforcement of it. But it's not a bad idea, though, because some folks there may be a way to do something to put something away if there is excess for people who need financial assistance. I mean, that's something we could consider.
There are no charges if they have financial hardship.
Well, that's what my question was. It says for the registration, but it doesn't talk about the inspection compliance, you know.
Which is gonna be costly. David, let me just say this before we go any further. I wanna thank you. You taking your time in tweaking this document. We've had an opportunity to meet with you, and several community groups have met with you. You took your time, and I'm appreciative of that. There were some areas there are some pushback areas, of course. One particularly was the fee issue. And I think that's some conversation we need to have, because one of the things that, similarly to what Mo just suggested, was having, instead of placing that into the general fund, making that a separate item so that houses that that can be perhaps rehabbed, using some of those funds for that. We understand that there are going to be some administrative costs, but some of that cost could very well be associated with houses that could very well be restored. Not restored completely, but at least having some income there to assist in the program. The other piece of that is, we're through with budgeting, but of course, you were doing a lot of what boarding up and demolishing houses and that sort of thing in a budget. Some of those monies could very well be placed into the administrative side with some latitude to place those other monies into places that are rehabbable, that we can rehab. So I think we're on the right track.
Yes, sir.
I think we're on the right track. But again, there are a number of houses that we do need just for the appearance of this city. Needs to be torn down.
Yes, sir.
And of course, that's another issue in itself. And demolition costs money. Which means that when we review next year's budget, there may be some issues where we need to expand some of those funds for demolition. I know one house that we demolished in my district. The cost was $6,500. And of course, that in itself hits that demolition piece pretty hard. So if we could very well look at some of that and further tweak that, it would certainly help.
That definitely would. I agree.
I just, under the exemptions, the one clarification I want to understand a little bit was the structures with DP zoning classification listed on the National Historic Registry. Why are those exempted?
There was some discussion. I met with the planning department, and we talked about that. There's already a financial burden with historic buildings as it is because
There's also lots of tax incentives and stuff that they get that none of these other property owners get, including the Bailey bill and everything else. And so, I mean, I think we need, because the DP zoning classification is a very large area in our community. So I think we need to look at that before we commit to that. That's a pretty big exemption.
Yes, sir, and I'm not opposed.
I think it's like 265 properties just in this zone downtown alone. So I do think that we ought to take a look at that before we finalize it, just to understand that, because I do think that, you know, there's some issues there that you would find that we're allowing one group of people to have who have opportunities to collect several other financial opportunities to help them get the building that the other property owners wouldn't have.
Yes, sir.
Just a comment.
Sir.
Yes, Mr. Davis.
Just going back to the concerns about property owners who may have a financial challenge. I'm hoping that maybe after 6 months or so, maybe 7 months, we could kind of take a quick look at where we stand, what are some of the issues with certain cases, and see if it's financial, and I'm assuming y'all might have a little bit, if not a whole lot of information on the property owner, age, income, and that sort of thing. You know, when I get calls, sometimes, in fact, I got one today, folks tend to volunteer that in terms of their capacity to, you know, participate financially. I'm hoping we can, at some point, take a look at that and see what the information tells us, number one. And number two, going back to, I think we touched on this yesterday, again, depending on what's divided between demolition costs, boarding up a building, and that sort of thing, if there's some way we could maybe contribute a little to a pot, that might be, that some folks may be able to, we may be able to help if there's a challenge with some of the costs of compliance and that sort of thing. Just something I think we all might want to think about.
Yes, sir.
David, you've met with a lot of these groups. Do we need to circulate this or have a public hearing or anything? Are the groups pretty well satisfied that it's been aired?
I mean, I've tried to address all the concerns the best I could. I think there might still be some opposition to it, but, I mean, without just not doing the ordinance at all, I mean, I don't know how we could go forward without some opposition.
I do want to, congratulate David for his efforts.
Thank you.
We got a lot of positive feedback from the business community and others who said that, he really came with the right spirit to the conversation. He didn't just give in to everything that everyone was saying, but he came solutions oriented and tried to find that common ground. So that's the best we can ever ask for. We always know that people will not totally agree with everything, but we need to try to get to the middle as best we can. And I feel like we have to. I don't know that. I don't know that we shouldn't.
We had one, because that's actually where he got some of these concerns.
We did have an initial public hearing.
Yeah.
I mean, legally, I don't know that we have to have another one. But it'd be up to the council.
One thing I would just suggest, and I know certainly we'll need some time for this to be implemented under our belt to see how it's working, but Mr. Davis and I were at a community meeting last night, and vacant buildings came up, and particularly most of the buildings that were raised as a concern for us are buildings that are in donut holes. And so I did share with the neighborhoods, the neighborhood that we were passing, well, it was possible that this would be passed, and that we would certainly share it with the county because we've done the homework and due diligence on something, and that, you know, it would be up to them to adopt something similar. But, you know, maybe once we pass it, we could just send it over there as a courtesy and just say that it's come up a couple times and this is what we're enacting, and that they may want to look at doing something similar.
And we did get, when we did the rental ordinance, the county actually did reach out to us, and we gave them a copy of what we did as well. So I don't think they ever took any action on it, but they did get a copy of it. But certainly, that is a problem for us, the donut hole, so we would certainly, it'd be to our benefit to try to get them on board with it.
Rock and roll. Good. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
So we
Thanks,
will
Dave.
get this on council's agenda in October. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Maybe they group some interest and get it publicized.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, David. All right. Housing authority?
Ms. Mayor, we go at number 1.
Housing authority.
Okay. We will now have our update from the Columbia Housing Authority, Ms. Ivory Matthews, our interim executive director. Welcome, Ivory. And I know Ms. Matthews has with her several board members and staff. Thank y'all for joining us, and I guess I'll leave it to my high school classmate, Mr. Cromartie, to make the introductions.
Mayor Benjamin, members of City Council, good afternoon. We are pleased to have with us our new interim executive director, Ms. Ivory Matthews. She's going to tell you about some of the exciting things happening at Columbia Housing Authority and some exciting things to come. We are very excited and lucky to have her here from Greenville. I would like to introduce fellow commissioner, Ms. Kara Simmons, who's also present and had to leave, our vice chair, Ms. Ann Sinclair. Ms. Matthews, I will let you take over and answer any questions and give the presentation and introduce staff. Thank you.
On behalf of the Columbia Housing's Board of Commissioners, we'd like to thank you again, Mayor Benjamin, and members of the Columbia City Council for inviting us here today to the work session to provide an update on Columbia Housing. Before I begin, I would like to introduce 2 of my team members, and that's Ms. Yvonne Bean, who is our Chief Operating Officer. Ms. Bean has been with the agency for probably a little less than 8 days. And I'd also come from Lafayette, Louisiana. And I'd also like to introduce Cynthia Hardy, who most of you know, need no introduction. But Cynthia Hardy is our Director of Communications and Public Relations. As you all know, I joined the agency on July 1st, 2019 as Interim Executive Director. Shortly thereafter, on July 5th, 2019, Columbia Housing's board held a meeting for the sole purpose of introducing a 12-month action plan. The major themes throughout the plan included improving service delivery to residents, creating a climate of transparency and accountability, maximizing operational efficiencies, and creating community confidence and increasing community confidence. Prior to joining the Columbia Housing, I was able to gain some insight on agency operations through the review of several internal documents. In reviewing those documents, I thought it would be best to incorporate a comprehensive assessment of all departments, using industry experts and third-party firms to take an impartial look at operations within the first 120 days. Some of those assessments have been completed while other departments are still being assessed. What I thought I would do for today's work session is talk to you a little bit about Columbia Housing's progress. I'll start first with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Most of you know it as Section 8. We have the opportunity right now to house an additional 400 families through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. This program allows families to rent on the open market to private landlords. We will be opening our waiting list in a few weeks to take applications. That information will be shared on our website and also marketed throughout the community with our community partners. Next, I'll move to a brief update as it relates to our housing developments. I'll start first with Lord Place and just give a tiny bit of history and then kind of an update in terms of where we are today. Lord Place is the redevelopment of the former Bell Arms and West Avenue apartments. It's located at 3800 West Avenue. The property was condemned, as you all know, by the city in 2013. In May of 2014, the Housing Authority entered into a master development agreement with Liberty Solutions, a general contractor from Charlotte, North Carolina, to redevelop the West Avenue site. The Housing Authority subsequently acquired the site from Allegra Properties in December 2015 and completed the demolition on the existing improvements in 2016. A partnership was formed by Liberty Solutions and a development plan was initiated. Financing was secured for this property in 2018 and construction commenced in January of 2019. The project consists of 87 total units, 48 two-bedroom units, and 39 three-bedroom units. It's built on 5.8 acres of land, and there's a total of 8 buildings, 7 residential buildings, and a small community building, which includes a management office.
What was the total unit count again?
This is 87 units, 87. The project was financed with tax-exempt bonds and 4% low-income housing tax credits. The bonds are short-term and will be replaced with an FHA 221D4 mortgage for permanent financing. In addition, as you all are aware, the City of Columbia also contributed $1.3 million of disaster relief funds towards this project, which we're very excited about. And please know this will not be our last ask. Construction is currently 47% complete and is scheduled to be finalized in March of 2020. Property management will manage, Superior Property Management Company will manage the property until the Housing Authority has developed the capacity to manage low-income housing tax credit properties. Gonzalez Gardens, in June of 2014, the authority entered into a master development agreement with Mungo Homes, a general contractor based here, as you know, out of Columbia, and Nix Development, a Maryland-based development company. These two firms subsequently formed Urban Renaissance LLC, and a development agreement was transferred to that new entity. The development agreement included the development of Gonzalez Gardens and Allen Benedict Court, former public housing communities. A demolition and disposition approval was received by HUD in 2015. The approval transitioned the land over to our nonprofit organization called Community Housing Authority Development, Inc., and required replacement of 128 units below 80% of the area median income, and 131 units between 80 and 120% of the area median income. These units have a 20-year restriction on those units of affordability. We've since then amendments to the development agreement call for the construction of 12 off-site single-family homes, and in the surrounding neighborhood, and 8 single-family homes on the Gonzalez Garden site. The 12 off-site homes were completed with gap financing, again, from the City of Columbia, which we're excited about that. And we are also excited to note that the 8 on-site homes were completed as of date, and all have been sold. A development plan was completed for Gonzalez Garden site, but the analysis of the plan, and this is kind of something we talked about when I first joined the agency, in reviewing the current development plan. We did place a pause on the current development plan to make sure that we had all of our financial sources were viable. And so we have subsequently developed some alternative financial scenarios that reduce the financing gap. We initially had a $6 million gap to complete the construction on this project, and we've narrowed it down to $1 million. We have $1 million gap right now. We're still working on to close that deal.
Is the actual development plan the same, though? I know there were some questions as to kind of the affordability, making sure single-family, the apartments. Has that remained the same, or are you looking at that as well?
We're also internally analyzing that as well, and also we're analyzing the buildings as well. The initial plan had 3-story walk-ups, and 3-story walk-ups in this community, I don't know if that would be, feasible, especially with families who are aging in place and things like that, to have to walk up 3 stories. So we're working internally just to create a different design concept, and then have further discussions with our board, and the community, and to gather feedback through charrettes on what that will eventually look like.
The
Yeah.
exciting piece, of course, is something you just mentioned just a moment ago. The excitement at Gonzales, of course, emanates with those 8 houses before they were even occupied, were sold. Now, of course, there has been some pushback in terms of, can we do more of them? And of course, just based on what I know and what I've read, the numbers have been crunched. It's a good start to something that's going to be very, very positive for our community. And that's a good sign, that residents are already there, already cutting grass, already maintaining property, and from all appearances, it looks good internally.
Thank
So
you.
with you tweaking the design and that sort of thing instead of the walk upstairs, and that helps tremendously.
Thank you.
Ms. Matthews, I also had a question about the 8 homes. Did I understand you correctly that there were originally 12 homes built and occupied, and then you added 8 more? So we've got 20 single-family homes over there?
Yes.
Okay.
You got them on the outside.
Down the hill, okay.
Yeah.
We had a
The
question
8
about
were the most recent ones. We actually had, we closed on those. Yeah, the 8 were closed on in between the last of June, early part of July.
really nice looking houses.
Yes, thank you.
Ira, you mentioned the gap financing needed is $1 million?
Yes, it's 1 million right now.
And that would, explain again what that gap would, what are you trying to close with that gap at this point? The reason I'm asking is we've had some discussions with, I think, the developer who's involved, and that number sounded a little bit differently to us.
Yeah, that number was certainly different than the conversation that you had. And that conversation was had with the developers prematurely, and it did not involve the Housing Authority, which was sort of kind of inappropriate to have that conversation without the Housing Authority, as we are a strong partner in the deal. And so we kind of went back to the table and just analyzed, where we currently were. And we also are able to maximize some of the instruments that we have access to close that gap. Like, we have access to new HUD programs called Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, and we have access to increase the revenue through our project-based voucher assistance. And so those are just some of the things that we did to close the gap. Yeah, but we're certainly back on, $1 million is the number right now, and we're certainly
So,
back on track with those
Is there
discussions.
the ability not to go into traditional finance to fix that gap based on the size of the project and all the program income that's coming in?
We have, so some of the traditional financing, what we try to do is look at some of the, non-traditional financing, because when we create these programs, there is they don't produce a lot of cash because the units are, the rents are affordable. And so working with those non-traditional financing options helps sometimes to make sure we aren't working so close against the margin. And some of the traditional mortgage financing programs require a quicker payback than some of the non-traditional. So traditional sources, typically we can get mortgages at about 20 years or, but some of the non-traditional sources, we can get mortgages at 40 years and sometimes longer than that.
But we're really, and the reason I'm saying that, it just seems to me is that this is a short-term gap, and if you could use that, then, once you got the project out of the ground, you got, the program in, you could refinance it. Just, it seems to me that this project seems to have had this gap discussion for a long time now, and it just seems like we gotta figure out a way to close it,
It's narrowed significantly, though.
Oh, it's a gap. Well, the first yeah.
Yes,
And what the gap pay for? What are the needs?
The gap is, what we're looking for, those things, to pay for hard costs.
They are hard.
Just hard costs, yes.
And I would think if you did a more traditional financing on a short term, the cost of that money is gonna be a lot more than what she could get with
Yeah, but if you turn around and you're balancing it over the 20-year period, the problem is if the project stays stalled on a gap, it's costing you more money anyway.
Waiting for
So I don't know if I'm just trying to think outside the box here, because it just seems to me is that there's a stall there, and it's got so much potential to affect the surrounding area, and with a positive effect, it just seems to me.
Because of that work, because of your work, we're a lot closer than we have been. So
Yeah,
can we
absolutely.
Can we get an updated sources and uses and kind of see how it all fits in, and we get, the sooner we can get that, the sooner we can make some moves. That's
Absolutely, because our development team internally, we're really working to get an updated sources and uses to have a more, a better meeting with you guys to talk about where we really are. So, yeah.
It's exciting.
Okay, thank you.
Is the infrastructure already in the ground? Water, sewer, cable, utilities, that kind of thing?
My
I'm
guess
not-
is it's to the site. It's probably to the site.
Yeah, probably to the site, but not on the site.
That's what we can help in.
I think we already have that.
That's what we can help in.
Yeah, okay, sure thing.
Be creative and.
We'll work towards it. I'll put on my Wonder Woman cape and we'll work towards it.
I think,
We've already had a groundbreaking.
Howard, are you up for re-election this year?
I think it's important to note that
Not all.
we hear that Gonzales Garden is at standstill and nothing has been going on. So we were trying to encourage you and support you anything we can so we can get this project back on the ground again, because everybody's asking us
Yeah.
what's going on with Gonzales.
Yeah, we actually placed it on pause, and, with me joining the organization just in July, we placed it on pause for about 2 weeks so that we could take a look again at the pro forma and the sources. And we knew that there were some things that we could do to close the gap. And so that's where we are. But we're on track now, so we will certainly be meeting with the city manager and her team to move this project along.
We would love to see some frames going up before.
Oh, absolutely.
November 5th.
Absolutely. All right, team, y'all with us? No pressure.
That's called pandering.
Yes.
So that's good stuff. Y'all dialogue.
What would be helpful just for optic reasons? Let's a bulldozer about 3 tiny houses, just to say
Oh,
that we in the process, just the optic.
I'll go on.
Okay.
Ms. Matthews, I'm gonna save you from our colleagues here. Keep on going.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. So moving along, the Allen Benedict Court property, we anticipate that all units will be released as of October 15th. In anticipation of the release, we have issued a solicitation for environmental consultants that will enable us to commence all environmental testing, including lead and asbestos This testing results will be included in the development of a remediation plan, which will be included in the specifications for demolition. So in short, we needed to do these steps so that we can put together the solicitation to procure a demolition contractor. The redevelopment of the ABC site was included in a development agreement with Urban Renaissance.
That's
The same group, yeah, Mungo and Nick's Development.
So when, that's news to me.
Let me finish that stream of consciousness, and then I know there's some interest in different parts of the adaptive reuse of the site, but finish what you're saying.
Okay, so it was included in the solicitation that was done by the Housing Authority back in 2013. However, much has changed since 2013, so in regards to the redevelopment of that site and the surrounding area, therefore, we intend to solicit a new master development partner with more extensive mixed income development experience. And we anticipate to also release that solicitation too by the end of the year.
So, obviously that's a very, it had a lot of problems for everybody and the things that happened there. So, but one of the things that came out of that is walking around, and I'm excited that you're doing a solicitation. I would encourage y'all to make that solicitation with an option for somebody to rehab that. We had an opportunity to take some folks over there who specialize in housing credits and stuff, and their initial kind of plan and take of what they thought could happen over there was pretty amazing. And sometimes it's great to take something that has left a bad taste in people's mouth and really turn it into something that everybody can grab a hold of and be really proud. And I would encourage y'all, because there's an opportunity to make that historic, which that means there could be some credits in there, so you could really do something unique that would really, have significant meaning to people. There's a lot of history in there, obviously, but the opportunity to modernize that property, with everything from courtyards to solar to, really capturing the heart of it and turning it into something that everybody would be really proud of is worth looking at. And so I would hope that y'all would look at it. I think going ahead and doing your understanding of the testing, we know there's probably some asbestos that needs to be done, lead mitigation, but the concrete buildings themselves have such good bones because the crawl spaces underneath them, the ability to bring in gas appliances or electric appliances, solar thermal heating, water courtyards, some of the reiterations of the people that have gone to take a look at it is pretty amazing. And these are private developers who see the value in the heart and the bones of that. And that would be really see the kind of the phoenix come out of the ashes there. So I hope y'all will at least take a look at that.
I think what Councilman Rickman is saying is think outside the box. Sometimes it's not necessarily to kind of follow the script on doing some stuff like that. I mean, I'm all for renovating or rehabbing the whole complex. I think there's a lot of history, but there's a lot of new things nowadays in technology and everything else that you can probably think outside the box and renovate that and bring it back to life sooner or faster than you would in traditional.
Some of the people who've looked at it who are interested have taken buildings that nobody else could do that to and created incredible living spaces and preserved them. And so I think it's worth taking a look at.
I appreciate you already thinking outside the box and reissuing an RFP on the site already, and also closing the gap on Gonzalez Gardens already. I've heard some of the same feedback that Mr. Rickman mentioned. I'm not sure if I'm as in love with the rehab of the existing. I've not been up under the buildings and everything like some of our folks may have been. I'm just not as in love with that concept. Y'all do due diligence. I'd encourage if you see something there. You've been a lot of different places and seen some pretty, I'm sure, creative deployments. And if there's some that hover around adaptive reuse that might help you get to a quality development with a lower price tag and leveraging credits and everything else, think it's worth a look, but I've always had a view of something different on the site, but that's your
You need to
call,
see
what
the
I understand.
picture.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I did
You
that.
see the preliminary drawing, you'd step back and catch your breath.
Make sure have they
Stumble
have they
over.
seen it?
Nope.
Okay.
I was told to not to do anything until she had the ability to get settled and get things going.
She seems pretty doggone settled to me right now, so
Well,
let's
yeah.
make sure we facilitate that conversation.
Well, I will like to say this too, you know, that property, you know, was under restrictive covenants with, you know, the federal government. And so we'd received approval from HUD for the demolition of that property. So to revert that back to something different than demolition, I think will be like an act of Congress, you know, to get that scenario passed. But I do think we could certainly look at some ways where we can still capture the history. You know, I've done this a number of times at different places, and we always make sure that there are design charrettes with the community, the surrounding community, and gathering feedback from the public on what that design will look like when it's all said and done. So the Housing Authority won't be designing this behind closed doors, but certainly out in the public to get the public's feedback, particularly the community, the surrounding neighbors in that community.
Just want to reiterate what Daniel said. There are developers coming out of the brickwork to do something creative on that piece of property. Whether it's the encapsulation of those apartments or taking what you got. I just think it gives us another opportunity to articulate and sort of dream beyond the box. I hear what HUD is saying, but if there is something plausible there, something that we are able to at least look at and talk about, it does give us an opportunity to do it. But I appreciate what you brought to the table today, and I hear what HUD is saying. HUD is saying demolition. What we are saying, I think, collaboratively, is that is there a creative hole or a creative possibility there? Where something that would be historically used for history purposes and that sort of thing. So it opens up a window, I think. Just an opportunity to talk.
First of all, how you enjoying your first council meeting?
Yeah.
I am enjoying it. Thank you.
What I would just say is, I mean, I think that Ms. Matthews is given us a lot of information, and I think she is thinking outside the box. Certainly what I hear her saying is there will be a request for proposals and out there, and if someone has a great idea that merits looking at deeper and she can, sell it to HUD, she's willing to do that. But right now, all she's saying is she's moving forward. Let's let her move forward and give her that leeway.
And I appreciate that, but just make me understand the demolition permit that you got from HUD. If you want to change your mind, why is that a problem? How does that work? I'm just.
HUD. I'm gonna help her out a little bit on that.
I got
That's
you.
what we
Okay.
have to deal with around here. She
Yeah,
is not,
and HUD doesn't-
That is no exaggeration.
Yeah.
What she's saying.
It literally takes an act of Congress to get approval to do the demolition. So, HUD, it's certainly full of regulatory requirements.
You're responsible for the HUD regulatory requirements.
Yeah.
Can we just make sure whatever procurement guidelines, we're not running afoul of them? And Daniel and Ed, whoever you guys have, who wants to share some information with the Housing Authority and their board for consideration,
Absolutely.
let's do it post haste.
Okay.
Her feet, both feet on the ground, she's settled.
Yes.
Let's get to it,
Okay. Well, I'm at the end of my presentation. So in closing, I would like to thank you all again, Mayor Benjamin and City Council, again, for allowing me to present during your work session. The city's support is immensely invaluable to Columbia Housing's ability to continue to preserve and create more affordable housing for all of the citizens of our community, and we look forward to our continued partnership with the City of Columbia. So thank you, guys.
question, back to your original, the first point of vouchers. So the 400 vouchers that will be released, I know we certainly all saw it with vouchers once the residents from Allen Court had to be relocated. But I think traditionally there's, it's great to hear there's vouchers because that waiting list is crazy. But I think there also has been a challenge, I think, in finding home or landlords that will accept vouchers. So can you guys talk about, have y'all thought through that? And is there a plan to make sure that as everybody wants to partner with the Housing Authority to provide quality, affordable housing in this community, that we have landlords who are willing to step up and partner with you guys as well and provide the units?
Absolutely. So we're going to be really beefing up our communications with our landlords and also the relationship with our landlords. Our landlords are so important to the success of this program. And so we're looking at landlords that we have not done business with in a while to see if they're interested in reconsidering doing business with us in the future. And then there are some additional incentives that we can do internally to do a better job at being a partner with our landlords that we're going to implement as well. So this landlord workshops are going to continue, just from here on out. So it's not going to be a one-time ordeal, but just a continuation of meeting with landlords. And these landlords could be mom and pop. So if y'all know of any, please let me know. Mom and pop landlords, they can be landlords that own just a few duplexes, multifamily units. Also, if you know of any commercial realtors or property management firms that have units available, please have them contact us as well. We should have, right now we've got our website is under construction. We have a splash page up right now. And we should have that website up within about 2 to 3 weeks. So that will be a gateway too, so our landlords can register on there to get involved in our workshops, to continue to redevelop that relationship.
So just to carry on that, a lot of the people, I don't say my friend, but landlords who would ask, I guess HUD requirement for voucher housing might have a different requirement than regular landlord, or is it the same? Is there a different specifications or something that a landlord has to meet for him to be on the voucher program?
Yeah, so the basic criteria for the landlord to participate on the voucher program is that they can't be delinquent with paying taxes to the local municipalities. And they also must meet housing quality standards inspections. And so it's not like code inspections, but it's a housing quality standards inspection that governs safe and sanitary kind of codes. And so we go through, we have an inspector that will go out and inspect the unit before we enter into a contract with the landlord. But those are the two biggest.
So that's the set, I guess, or the
Yeah.
list that I'm looking for, or maybe you can either put it on your website or email it to us that we can share to people. Because that's, the myth out there is, oh, they have different specifications or different requirements than anything else, and we don't want to go through all the hassle or all the, headache of qualifying and all. So if you would send that list to us or me
We sure
personally,
will.
I can share it with the people I know.
Okay, we sure will. We'll get that to you.
The problem sometimes is, Mo, is that because of the inspections, the Housing Authority will require that houses are up to a certain standard. There are some landlords who do not want to keep the property to a certain standard, and so they choose not to participate in the program. But I guess to that point is making sure that, the partnership, you're working with landlords, because I know I've heard, some concerns before is that, some of the standards are more than even Housing Authority owned properties. And I know that that's certainly something that you're concerned about, and we'll make sure that's addressed. But I think that's been a concern in the past. So I think it's that redeveloping that relationship with landlords and understanding that the standards are the standards based on safe and security of the residents. It's not meant to be punitive. And we hear it a lot sometimes with the landlord registration and others. People feel like, well, I'm not making a whole lot of money, and I've got to reinvest in the property. Why do I have to have these other things? So I think it's just that communication, and that would be my concern. Is 400 units is great, and we need that in the marketplace, but to get those 400 units so that people get a voucher and they're able to actually use the voucher is going to be the thing that we would like to see.
Okay.
You have something, Sam?
No, I'm okay.
Two thoughts, and if that's okay, we can wrap up Ms. Matthews' presentation. One, obviously, whatever you're doing on Allen Benedict Court, let's keep it moving fast. People need housing. We want to make sure whatever we go, if it's adaptive reuse, a new development, we want to see a quality product on the ground sooner rather than later. Secondly, I know that Mr. McDowell has been spending a lot of time with both Ms. Matthews and Chairman of the board, just talking about food security in and around the former Save-A-Lot location. They've been incredibly helpful and supportive as we look at creative ideas to try and address that need, while of course recognizing the Housing 30 Central focus in providing housing to folks and making sure that they can cash flow to meet their primary operational needs. They've been very helpful as we look at creative solutions to it. So I just want to say thank you for that. We want to continue to facilitate a productive dialogue in that space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew, just a personal
Point.
I hope this is the start of a new, creative, and wonderful partnership. We know what our role is. You all know what your role is. But somewhere in the middle, there needs to be, Ernest and I have done some talking about partnering, and I think you may have shared it with Ms. Matthews. There needs to be a positive partnering aspect as it relates to both city and CHA. Not only for the financial infrastructure needs, but there needs to be a process where we can partner. Believe it or not, my emphasis, of course, is on those persons, those residents, those clients, those brothers and sisters who are impacted by not having anywhere to live, having somewhere to live, and not having anywhere to live. The thing that probably drives me more is two men, Mr. Roper and Mr. Whitaker. They are constant reminders of what we need to do. And I think we can get things done when we are collaborating with each other, talking to each other, and partnering with each other. So I appreciate you coming here today. You didn't have to come. Like the old song says, you didn't have to do it, but you did. And we are glad that
You had to be here.
Oh, I know that.
And we're glad you came.
Yes,
Mr.
I'm so glad to be here.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Let me say this. It's been nice listening to you. You obviously do have the background, track record, and expertise. What I'm liking about this, we've all had a pleasant role to play up to this point in our own way and that sort of thing. But I think what we've sort of laid out today, and this is public, that this area, this neighborhood, this location is moving forward. And anybody who is familiar with it, I can remember when I first came here, some of my best friends, academically and socially, lived there. And people who have come from that area have made their own mark in this city, statewide and nationally. So the good thing is that everybody's on the same page on this. The need is there, that's undeniable, and there's a commitment to get it done.
Thank you.
Thank you. You better leave while you can.
Okay. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank y'all. Ernest, Kara, thank y'all. All right.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege, if you don't mind. We're holding item 2 due to Mr. Blackstone's being under the weather. We will reschedule the update from the Columbia Chamber. But I wanted to introduce some of you, I hope have maybe met her in passing, our new HR director, Ms. Denise Javis. Denise has been with us, is it 2 weeks yet, Denise? Officially, but yeah, she came in the midst of the move, so she was working with the team as they relocated to Main Street. And we're so excited to have her. Denise brings a wealth of HR experience, but also education background, 28-year education professional, and 10 of those years specific to human resources. And she's a native of Orangeburg, South Carolina, graduate of South Carolina State and the University of South Carolina for her, am I getting this right, Denise? For her master's, that's right. And another terminal degree from Nova Southeastern University. But Denise has just fit right in, and we're so excited to have her. She and Pam are quite the team. So, yeah. Yeah.
I know, right? I'm glad you said not me.
Thank you. I appreciate being welcome here today.
Yes.
You mentioned my experience in education. I'm very goal-driven, and we love to have data to drive that. And I had my first staff meeting a couple of days ago, and we talked about a customer service satisfaction survey and how that might point to specific areas of responsibility. But whatever it is, we're going to tackle it together. We're going to get through it together. So everybody's on board, and we're excited.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. Thanks,
Can I ask a
Denise.
question?
Sure.
When's the next open enrollment?
I'm
I'm just kidding.
It's coming up, I'm sure you know.
Well, if y'all have any questions, they have certain things they need from HR quite often, so good to know Denise. Yes,
Good to see you,
ma'am.
Denise. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we are tracking
get
pretty
moving.
well today. We have 2 quick items and then some more lengthy items in executive session from yesterday that carried over to today. And I'll need y'all to stay put down here for the first part of executive session just so we can utilize the screen, and then we'll move upstairs. But the next item is the AMI water billing. Mr. Clint Shealy, Assistant City Manager for Columbia Water.
Is this in direct response to the questions we received last time? Or was
No, sir. I think Mr. Badura specifically had some questions from some of his constituents, and we were just thought we would address them with all of you.
Water
So-
bills, I'm like,
All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
but some of it is legit, and he'll go over it with y'all. It's kind of important.
We do have an issue that some of your constituents have brought to our attention, and we just wanted to make you aware of that and talk about water billing. And it's just something that comes up on social media quite often. And we generate about 145,000 water bills every month, and you can imagine that not every one of those 145,000 recipients is happy to receive that bill. So things do happen, leaks and whatnot. So we wanted to address some of those concerns. I do want to let you know that we have reviewed our data over the previous years versus this most recent period. We have not seen any sort of a surge in complaints or concerns about water bills. This is kind of natural run of business volume that we're seeing. I think maybe they're a little more prevalent on social media and the Nextdoor app that you're seeing, Councilman Badura. But we did identify one particular issue that we definitely wanted to make you aware of that. Before we touch on that, I wanted to talk about a few of the efforts that we have made over the last 2.5 years to make sure our water bills that we're sending out, even in advance of the AMI investment that we're making, are accurate. And so just wanted to refresh our memory about that. You remember something that Joey had started implementing was changing up our meter reading routes, because we've got staff going out and physically reading 145,000 meters. It's about 142,000 right now because we've put in a few AMI meters. But and so we've, instead of the same person reading the same route every month after month after month after month, 6 months to a year, every 2 to 3 months, we swap routes. And so there's a little bit of accountability there. We also routinely audit if there are any issues. We go back, we pay somebody to go back and reread the route to make sure that we've gotten the numbers right. So we're doing that. We've got a consolidated skip report that we implemented about 2 years ago. We've seen our number of estimated and skipped meter readings steadily decline. So we're up toward best practice, best in class, with about 1% estimated readings. That's still quite a few estimates out of 145,000 readings every month. But we're doing what we consider best in class for folks that read meters manually. And again, we want to improve on that, and AMI will help us. But that has given us increased accountability. If you remember, you allowed us to invest in vehicles for our meter readers. I received a call from one of you about a vehicle that was parked at the Best Buy at Harbison, a meter reading vehicle, and inquired about that. And it was a good inquiry. We were able to see exactly when that vehicle was parked there, exactly where it was parked, when it was moved to the next spot, and we could go back and see every meter that was read in that Walmart and Best Buy. So that meter reader, we caught him doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He parked his vehicle and was walking to the meters and reading those meters. But there's that accountability there, and which is a nice tool to be able to check behind employees when you do have those types of concerns. We've implemented the customer advocate team. That has been effective in terms of these very problematic high bills, trying to help the customers diagnose what's happening there. Might there be a leak that's hard to identify? So those things are being effective.
Do you have any stats on the customer advocate team, like how many concerns are they getting, and then the time it takes to resolve it? Or could you get that?
I can get that. Yes, ma'am, we will get that. We track those. I'm sorry, I don't have those with me today. We've got an escalated complaint review process, so that if you get a complaint, if I get one, if Ms. Wilson gets one, we take that directly to staff. A lot of times those are funneled through Shanique as well, and we try to coordinate a response on that. We have a high bill screening process, so that if we do have an error in meter reading, we're catching that bill before it goes out. Now, that is a very manual process. So that is a difficult process, and it really it's impacted by how quickly we get the meter reading data loaded. So we don't catch every one, but we're catching more than we used to.
But Clint, when you're doing the bills and it shows your volume usage or whatever, can't we set the software up that it automatically connects when somebody's got an above average bill or whatever?
Yes, sir, we can. Where we set that threshold and how many rereads that means, because the average, above average, it's hard to define average. What is average in the summer? What is average in the wintertime with irrigation? Sometimes folks, they may use twice as much water in 1 month as they did the next. What does that trigger? Then how many screenings does that generate? And right now, since it's a very manual process, if we set that threshold too low, it's simply too much of a volume and we can't get to them all. So we've got that trigger set fairly high right now. And again, we don't catch every one, but we're catching more than we used to. And with the AMI implementation, that's really going to take care of a lot of those. So.
That's why you need that app that I was telling you about, because you can connect that threshold high level, that if somebody wins over his average or whatever threshold that you're doing, because you can text them right away and connect with them right away.
The software will, even if it's a pattern, not only total usage over the month, a pattern that is indicative of a leak, say that they use water every hour for a 24-hour period. Most residential customers don't use water in that pattern. They can get a text alert notifying them, hey, you may have a leak. I'm not saying you do, but you may have. That information's available, will be available to our AMI customers when we launch that application, which is coming very soon. So just wanted to bring you up to speed on a few of those things, and let's talk about the bills that we're sending for those 3,000 to 4,000 customers and we're replacing meters today that are receiving AMI meters. So our existing analog water meters measure water.
Can we get, I know you said it's like folks who are affected will get something, but can we get kind of a list of the rollout, like what neighborhoods, because people are starting to ask me and I don't know.
Yes, ma'am.
It was in
the book?
It's in the last meeting briefing packet,
We
but.
can get it to you.
But
I have the book in my car, so if it's in the book, I'll get it on break, and you can show me how to
I
read
wanna
it.
make sure we know specifically what you're asking for. The actual neighborhoods that was in there.
Schedule, okay.
Right, Clint?
yes, ma'am, it was, and we also update that each month when we send out that monthly council updates. In the back of that are detailed maps of where they'll be and week-by-week breakdown of where our staff plans to be.
Okay, yeah, that's probably the thing. The maps are probably not the best for me.
Okay.
Can I just get like a list of the neighborhoods?
Yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am,
Yeah,
we
that's-
will absolutely do that, so let's make a note of that. Okay, so we're reading our analog meters, and traditionally have read them in cubic feet, and we bill them in hundreds of cubic feet, so CCF, and that's how we've generated our bills, that's how our rate schedule is set up. You've heard folks mention we give the first 300 CCF with the base charge there. Our new AMI meters, we made the decision in order to try to be more transparent, we're going to bill, instead of these mystical units of 100 cubic feet, we're going to bill in read meters in gallons and bill ultimately based on 1,000-gallon units. So that's a little easier for folks to understand. This transition from the old technology to the new, we've got a few thousand receiving a bill that was generated from a new style meter, the rest generated from an old style meter. So there's a little bit of a crossover there, and that's the position that we're in right now.
When you're billing in thousands, between, let's say, 2,000 and 3,000, that would be one charge. So if you use 2,500 gallons, it wouldn't hit the next 1,000 gallons.
You'd be billed for two.
You'd be billed.
Yes, sir.
You might
The
be
next
getting
cycle.
300 cubic feet plus a few extra gallons.
But it catches up the next time. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As it rolls over.
Is it printed on the bill?
I'm going to show you. Yes, sir.
2,000, 3,000, 4,000?
We're going to show you exactly what the bills are right now and what we're looking to go to try to be transparent. So this is an example of a current bill that is going out right now. We've sent about 2 cycles of these bills out.
It can't be mine, that's too cheap.
So, if you'll.
It's not all about you, Daniel.
One issue, though, that was pointed out to us, and you will notice, the readings here, 4 and 11, those are the actual meter readings that came off of the AMI meter. So that's indicative of 4,000 gallons of usage as the period started, 11,000 gallons of usage as the period ended, the final reading, that's a unit of 7.
It's designed to confuse you so you don't know what you're paying for. I mean, that's all behind this thing, you're right. I understand that.
That is 7,000 gallons of usage. For the sewer.
Residential bill?
That is a residential bill, yes, sir.
7,000 gallons?
Our typical customer uses 6,000, 8,000 in that range, yes, sir. So 6 units. So what you'll see down here, though, is a decimal, and the formatting for the printing is not correct. But this appears that they used more sewer than they did water. We don't meter the sewer, we meter the water. Unless they drank a whole lot of bottled water, they didn't produce more sewer than they did water. What's happening is we are printing what's entered in as the reading from AMI in 1,000 gallons, and for sewer, it's converted to units of 100 cubic feet. That is confusing for the customer. So we've got to address that, and we recognize that. Very important point. The bill is accurate. So we haven't overcharged anybody, but it is confusing if they see that. And so due to some customer feedback, we've recognized we've got a problem here. So we've got a couple of potential solutions to that and a phased-in approach that we wanted to share with you. And we just wanted you to be aware. We're going to put information on our website explaining this, but also share with you what we're going to be doing here. But again, the bills are accurate. That is what's most important. Pardon?
You need to do an infomercial.
And we can do that. So this is what we're looking at. We're calling it option A, but this is really phase 1 of what we want to do for those AMI customers. So we want to report the reading. We want the customer to be able to go out and look in their meter box and see a number that they, on their bill, that is reflective of what they're reading on the meter, so it's not confusing for them. Or once we launch the app, be able to see on the app what their meter's reading, and that be reflective of what's on the bill. Completely transparent, accurate, and understandable for the customer.
Oh, I thought that we was talking about bill, y'all didn't pay the power bill.
So these readings will continue to be for AMI customers, they'll be in those same
You're
units.
snoring, Ed.
Now, the reading
No
unit,
snoring.
we're then going to show in thousands of gallons, and then we'll convert that to a billed unit. So it's just a mathematical conversion to CCF at that point, and we've got the conversion factor down here. They'll also see their previous year's usage in CCF, and the charges are accurate.
Okay, so you're converting everything to CCF.
Why didn't you just convert it back the other way where people are used to reading it that way?
So we're going to get there for phase two. That's what phase two is going to look like. We hope to implement this change, which will be no cost to us. It's just a printing, the information's there, within the next 2 weeks. That's what we want to do. Have the explanation on our website this week, implement this printing change within the next 2 weeks as soon as we possibly can. But that's not the long-term solution, because we want to have a bill that's designed to look like they're going to look for the next 20 years. Because ultimately, everybody is going to have an AMI meter, and they're going to be billed in thousands of gallon units.
So
Yes,
one
sir.
question before we move on. So are we changing this bill look to all the bills, whether you got an old meter or a new meter?
Yes, sir.
Even though the old meter is not gonna say thousands of gallons, you're not gonna read it in gallons, right?
That's AMI, right?
This will be AMI, but we can reflect this bill on every customer. It can look this way because this is their previous reading. If it's an AMI meter, it'll be in thousands of gallons. It'll be CCF. It's what shows up on the meter. And then this unit of reading for AMI customers, it'll print KGAL. For analog meter, it'll print CCF.
Oh, that's what I was saying.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The bill will look the same, the units will change based on the type of meter they have, and the system will pick that up and recognize that automatically, so it's not a manual adjustment.
We hope.
And Kent, that's until you got AMI, quote unquote, everywhere.
Actually, Councilman, great question, until then, but we want to implement the new style bill sooner, and I'm going to show you what that looks like as well. This is just an interim solution because we've recognized there is some confusion, and we want to minimize that. It's a pretty easy change. The more involved change is starting to bill customers that have AMI meters in units of 1,000 gallons. Our ordinance is set up where we bill based on units of CCF. And we've already asked our legal team for advice. If we had one little change, one little sentence to the ordinance, can we bill analog customers as CCF and bill AMI customers in KGAL? The rate table really, a drop of water costs what a drop of water costs. It doesn't matter whether you measure it in KGAL or CCF. It's just math conversion at that point. So we want the flexibility to be able to bill either in 1,000 gallons or CCF, depending upon the type of meter that you have. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this question. At our last council meeting, there was two young ladies, I think, who had some issues with AMI.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, will that give them that opportunity to opt out of that and stay with the?
So what we have done, Councilman Duvall, yes, they had some concerns about the technology, and we have continued to be in dialogue with them. We have shared a legal opinion about we are not going on their property to replace a meter. So there's some of that going back and forth. What we have done is place those on a deferred list. So we have not changed out their meter while we continue to try to answer their questions and educate them about the benefits of AMI. As we continue the evolution and the installations, if we see we're getting more and more of those, we're going to generate a cost of service basis to say, it's a possibility. I mean, we may just move forward, and we'll talk about all these options with you, but one option is to generate a cost of service and say, look, if you want to leave that old meter there, we'll come read that old meter, but it's going to cost you X dollars extra per month for us to have that staff person reading, driving a vehicle out there and reading that. If we allowed many, many people to opt out and they didn't have to pay that extra charge, we would never get the rate of return on this major investment that we're making, so. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, it's a little bit of a digression, but not really. I'm getting, not as many on the meters, but I'm getting some of those on the meters. I think we're all getting a lot on the 5G as well. I know Teresa Kay and I have been talking, but is it possible to maybe have, at a work session, and that's fine, we can refer it to environment infrastructure, but maybe some kind of briefing on the newer technologies and the research and kind of where we are, because I think that, especially the ones we're getting on 5G, that's a form letter, that's a form email that's being generated, but it's starting to generate. Well, no, I'm getting some from people in Columbia, but they're probably a part of this group. But I'm just saying, before it gets too big, if we could head off, that people understand that we're hearing it. We've got, we're hearing we've looked at the research, we've looked at the technologies. With Teresa, she's giving me a good briefing on where we are as far as legally with the 5G. But I just think that we're starting to get more and more, and as people start hearing other people's complaints, this is going to generate more, and maybe to get out ahead of it, maybe we can have some kind of work session briefing on just what cities are doing, what these technologies are, and how we've done our due diligence as best we can to make sure there are no health concerns that we're aware of. You seem you concerned?
Well, I think that yes, we can do that. I guess I'm thinking through who would present on the science of it ultimately. And, a lot, school districts are dealing with those complaints because they're willing to put up the towers as they're getting, I think we do too. I don't know that we get the return that maybe the school districts are, but some of it is. And sometimes I think when we feed into the discussion, you're gonna also create that environment for more. If y'all want us to do it, we absolutely can do it. I guess we'd have to think through which areas of service in a city are being impacted by it right now. Simultaneously, we're trying to move towards more smart city type.
And I guess that was my point, is that as part of a smart city, there are things that we have to move towards.
I think we've clearly chosen the path, and we need to execute that path. And if there's some folks, small groups or maybe not so small groups, that have some type of conscientious objection, and we want to find some way to allow them to go their own path. If there's a fee for service associated with that, then we can work within our full deployment to meet those needs. And it seems like that's the reasonable way to do it. But I don't want us to spin our wheels, on particularly. I mean, we not only chosen our path, we really chosen our path. Invested some significant ratepayer funds in doing so, and it's the right thing to do. It's the right way to go. But I understand the concerns of some of the families, and I mean, I've gotten the emails as well, been kind of the computer generated ones, but nonetheless, legitimate concerns. If we're going to give staff some direction, let's give staff direction to come up with a construct that allows them to deal with the concerns of those folks in a way that falls within our system. Y'all fine with that?
I do. I mean, and I use the school example is because those are everybody's babies, okay? And so when families have questioned it there, the approach that I've seen consistently is they address it. Yes, we're doing that. There's no science that says we shouldn't be doing it. We've looked at it. I think we've said those things. I mean, short of saying that in a public forum again, and we can continue to do that and maybe have a pat statement that we continue to push and utilize. I guess I hesitate about like a work session discussion, because I just don't you know, there's always gonna be two sides of an issue, and you can look for the research and who's to say that we on staff have someone who can get up and speak to it all.
And maybe it's that statement.
Why don't you just-
because
they get a
I
choice,
equate it
they
to
can-
like
they can
the
go to well.
fluoride in the water.
Right.
You know.
And we went through
yeah,
that,
we went
didn't
through
we?
all
Yeah.
that stuff,
Went
and it's
through
like,
well.
this is what we do, this is and so I think maybe, I don't know if, I feel like we've done that.
Okay.
Basically, the statement, we don't have any research that tells us differently. We've done our due diligence, and this is the path we're taking. Maybe that's.
And I think the municipal association, or was it municipal association, Teresa, that sent they've done it, some of it too, because the 5G stuff, y'all are getting everybody, every municipality's getting it to the point they put something out. So I don't know if we've shared that with council or not, but we will do that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Dr. Oz did a special
Yeah.
on that. There wasn't any evidence either way. I mean,
And I think this is a much different example, but the algae
We got it
blooms
right.
right now, Clinton, those are doing a phenomenal job of addressing it, and people seem to get it, and the conspiracy theorists, hopefully, we just keep saying what it is and what the facts are, and we're addressing it.
the water allergy?
The algae and the water that's causing
The
the
taste
and the
issues on the Lake Murray side, which are much, much better, by the way. The measures that we've taken have been effective so far, so.
I haven't heard much of that. A lot
Right.
of the water bills this
Yeah.
year though. But
And that's more on the northwest side.
Depends on where you live.
Yeah, depends on where you live.
I think bottom line, our bills are accurate. We do have a plan that our AMI customers, hopefully by the beginning of next year, we're going to have to potentially change the ordinance, so you'll see that moving forward. But AMI customer would get a bill based on 1,000 gallons, and a log customer would still get a bill based on CCF until their meter is changed out. So that's the long-term solution. Ultimately, everybody gets that
Thank you
bill.
for clearing.
Yes, sir. I
clarifying that.
appreciate the questions.
Because I thought that was a pretty interesting discovery that we discovered, and
Yes.
I'm glad we cleared the air and everybody's happy, yeah.
We want every customer to be able to quickly and easily have confidence in that bill and understand everything that's on that bill. It's really important. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that happens. I did have one other mention about Google reviews and an unhappy customer that had been drawing our attention to a website. I spent the better part of an evening reading 153 reviews that we have on Google. And many were not good. Our star rating is not great. I queried several other leading utilities in our region. Misery loves company, I'll just say that. We're right in line with those. There were a few positive comments. The majority of comments that I read, the common issues were call hold time, which we're working very hard to address. The payment system, the missing digit issue, let's make it easy for people to give us money. That has been addressed. Some folks are unhappy with the bill. There's out of city, in city, a lot of those, and some just said we're plain old crooks. So, they're not happy with the leak adjustment. So, many of the things though that we saw are issues that we're already trying to address. So I didn't want you to know we're not ignoring that as well. So, any questions?
Speaking of customer service and people call in the numbers and all that, I get a lot of nobody answers, nobody cares, where are we, are we collecting that data? Are we working on it?
Yes, sir. So we are collecting that data. We reviewed that data this morning in our staff meeting. What we saw was not good. We had a little bit of a roundtable discussion at the staff meeting about what are we going to do about this. We took some actions to reduce that hold time today, but it's still not good. We are going to be applying a lot of resources and mental energy in trying to reduce that. We're also bringing in a new customer care administrator as well that I think will help bring some new ideas to the table. But Ms. Wilson has invested in us as managers going to training up in Virginia about, and most of us have been through that, and how to become a high-performance organization. We're going to apply that methodology to call hold times in particular.
I think it's the problem with most of the conversations that I get from the call hold time is the fact that nobody can help them. They can't give them direction. They can't tell them anything. They can't make a decision. They can't do this. And let alone the people who go downtown. And it's constant, you know, I mean, it's just, these people are calling 3 or 4 times trying to get to the right person. So I think it just goes back to what we've talked about before, is somehow we got to give people autonomy to be able to answer and make a decision. And that's what the customer wants. They don't want to talk to 5 people to get that decision.
That exact empowering the folks and that front, second line of response is what this high-performance organization methodology is all about. And so we're going to allow them to help us improve the process. They need to be participatory in improving the process. But that's our next approach.
It's cultural,
It is.
unfortunately. It's
Absolutely.
cultural that we have
Yes,
here,
sir.
and somehow we got to change that. It's like when we do a repair work, some people's repair gets done right away, and other people, months and months, they're out there, their yard's disturbed, their roads, you know, this and that, and it's communication, and it's how we, you know, it's easier for people to, it's kind of like, you know, you go to a restaurant, if somebody comes see you right away, you've been there for an hour, you really hadn't, but you have in your mind.
Yes, sir.
But if somebody came, I'll be right with you, they bring you a glass of water, I'll be right back, you're calm, you're relaxed. Same thing with the customers, it's that touch, they kind of know, and somehow we gotta let people be ownership of their projects. Doesn't matter if it's somebody in public works or if it's somebody behind a desk or on the phone. We gotta give them the autonomy to take ownership.
Exactly what this does. And the ACMs, Henry's got to go now, the department head, I mean, it's been a process. They've all been through it. But and they had to, but now it's that mid-level manager all the way down to our folks in the field, that cultural change. And it doesn't happen overnight, but we're working at it really hard. Because it's really, you know, I teased them because I went through it first, and I came back all, you know, excited about it. This was several years ago now. And every single time any of our folks have gone to this, they drank the Kool-Aid. Because at first they go like, what is she sending me to? But they've met lots of friends in governance across the country. Tyler St. Clair, who's y'all's retreat facilitator, that's where I met her. So.
Yeah, we believe it makes for a more engaged employee as well, more satisfied employee too. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Clint.
Thanks, Clint.
There's got to be something done, that's all we have to say.
So Mr. Badura brought up another issue. I think this will be quick too, just for some discussion on the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting schedule.
So the discussion came from last week's BOZA meeting, and then the Planning Commission the week before that. So the Planning Commission takes cell tower discussions on their 10 o'clock, and then the Board of BOZA, it's 10 o'clock. Some of the residents came up or contacted me is, why are the meetings at 10 o'clock instead in the afternoon? And that's what my only question is there, like, are we set on 10 o'clock? And, I mean, we've had the same discussion with council meetings that we had. You know, they used to be at noon or 2 o'clock, and now we've moved them to 6 o'clock where people can attend. Is that something that's set in stone, or can we change it? Can we adjust the time? I know, and I appreciate the committee members who volunteers their time to do this. I'm not really, I'm not going, like, I'm not saying anything about the committee. I'm just like questioning, is there any way we can play around and move the time where more residents can attend those meetings if they need to? Anybody's thoughts?
Is that our decision, or traditionally, has that been?
No, and Chris is here, so she may want to chime in. I think the board themselves the board members created their schedule, and I think they've weighed in on they like their schedule. But anyway, Krista, if you could maybe help us out with how that historically has worked.
The 10 o'clock goes way back beyond any of our tenures here. So Board of Zoning Appeals is 10 o'clock, DDRC is 4 o'clock, Planning Commission is 5:15 p.m. So Planning Commission is actually after hours. And there was an effort by one of the Board of Zoning Appeals members to have the rest of the board change that date. That was not successful with the board members. That said, you appoint the board. So I believe in some way you could influence their decision-making on that, not on any other decisions they make, but on that particular item, I think you could have a discussion with the chairs. They're at 4,
For Plan Commission
5:15.
Boza is the only 10 o'clock. And I understand Boza is, like, followed state legislation or state law on a lot of decisions they make, and I'm just curious why, I mean,
Maybe send them a letter
Is
asking
there,
them.
is there any natural aversion or?
From the boards, from the board members, there certainly is. And I mean, I think some of the discussion from them was, well, you also have business people who are doing business before the board. And so I think that was some of their argument at the time, was that, but.
It still doesn't make a sense because business people, you're still taking them away from their business to come at 10 o'clock in the morning.
The people that are on the board now.
yeah, they do, they are.
People on the board there, they just get off.
Additionally, see, Board of Zoning Appeals meetings used to be like council meetings and last 6, 7 hours.
He's billing the whole time.
So if you were to start at 5, it would go later. They no longer last
He
that
bills
long.
when he walks out that door.
But my point,
So that could have been a rationale.
Agree and understand what the commission, board's concern. I agree with Mr. Majority, that's the whole reason we changed the council. So if maybe share sentiment with the board that we like to.
Just ask them to consider.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we do an official letter asking them to consider it. I mean, just so it's kind of on record, instead of putting Krista in the middle.
Well, it is official, it's public hearing, work session, we're talking about in public, so.
But yeah, maybe a request from us just to consider it. And maybe
I
outlining
just
some
think
reasons.
I just think it's beneficial for the residents, for us. I mean, sometimes I know we can attend, or we can as a public, but nothing more than that. But not that I'm trying or making a habit of attending, but I think there's a lot of residents who wish to be there, especially on the Boza.
Again, deference to the members who are serving and volunteering their time, deference to the businesses who present before them, priority is to the general public. And I think making sure the vast majority of the population can attend is more important. Ms. Lowry?
I go to all the meetings, and the time is really bad for the people that have to work and stuff. And with the board meeting, this is what my complaint last week. They are not considerate of us. We had to sit through a whole session last week. We had 30 people in here to fight in our neighborhood, and the girl was late. But when we be late, they go ahead and pass it. They waited on this girl, and people have to go back to work. They're not considerate. And the board meeting, they need to go out and see what the zoning people have on the agenda, because they just try to pass. They want to put a business in our neighborhood. I wasn't going for it. And I told them, I said, we are tired now. Stop putting these businesses in there. I want to say this, no. Okay. The time need to be changed, because people got to go to work. I go to all of them mostly, and they disrupt people. They're real nasty. I want that. They real nasty. They got some new people on there too. They nice.
Ms. Lowry concurs.
We will send the message.
Yes, sir. I heard you say, Krista, do we want to send a message?
I think Krista said she will.
She will deliver the message. You will deliver the message.
I will deliver the message,
Is
yeah.
it
So,
is it an easy message or a hard message?
well, given that it was recently rejected by the board, it's easy for me to tell them, absolutely. We've been given more difficult messages to deliver.
I think even if it's, I mean, people have real lives and real jobs and schedules they're adjusted to. We move our schedules around to do our jobs. If it's a 60-day or 90-day phase or something like that, just
Certainly.
That is the expectation.
Got it.
If we get feedback contrary to our urgent, we'll do that.
And if I may ask, around the 5 o'clock hour, just anywhere in kind of later.
4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I think people can take an hour off from work easier than taking a whole day off.
Understood. Okay, we'll do that.
Sometimes these meetings can get long, so the later, just like we start fading at certain hours, they're human beings too.
Yeah,
so
Howard
we'll
fades at
start
4 o'clock in the afternoon.
We'll do that.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you, Krista.
All right,
Thanks,
so
guys.
we will
Move to executive
entertain the
session.
executive session motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion, we go into executive session and ask the clerk to repeat the additions that we had at the start, and I will add to the executive session, receipt of legal advice relating to pending rating of potential claims, 30-4-70A, James Morris versus COC, Jeffrey Rich versus COC, Shayna Griffin versus SCDOT, COC in Richland County. Receipt of legal advice relating to matters covered by attorney-client privilege pursuant to 30-4-70A2, ordinance 2019-074, Columbia Urban League and AMI, discussion of employment of employee pursuant to 70A1 municipal court.
I'm sorry, Mr. Duval, for number 8, could you also add, administrative administrative team or something like that? I need to add an employee.
Just say Teresa.
Employee matter.
Administrative matter.
Yes.
Administrative matter. Discussion of appointment of person to a public body pursuant to 78-1 Parks and Recreation Foundation. Discussions of negotiations instance proposed contractual arrangements pursuant to 78-2 Affordable Housing Loan Grant Opportunity.
We're gonna finish, we are, we're gonna finish. No, it's a lot.
Municipal Complex and Convention Center to item 7, the proposed purchase of property, Fire Station 2 in Seco, and the sale of property, Genstar Water Tank.
Right.
Wow.
Seconded.
Yeah, we're gonna do the ones from yesterday. Thank you. I mean, the one upstairs.
Here.
Mr. McDowell?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr.
Yeah.
Raw?
Aye.
Mr. Badura?
Aye.
Mr. Vine?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mayor Benjamin?